Hello and welcome to Shit I Wish Someone Told Me, a weekly series of educational conversations where my guests and I talk about all of the shit that we wish someone would have told us at one point or another, all of which relate back to the most important topic of all, you, and figuring out who that person is and learning how to accept that person and be confident in who that person is so that you can live the life that you want. I'm your host, Johnna Renée, certified evidence-based life coach specializing in behavioral change and teaching you research-backed techniques using brain science to help you finally feel good and become the person that you need to be in order to have the life that you want. And joining us today, ladies and gentlemen, we have Stephen Westbrook III of Stephen Westbrook Training, aka Sweat. And what we're going to be talking about for you today is shit I wish someone told me about flourishing. We're going to be specifically focusing on, first of all, what it is, and then how you actually do it. And we're going to talk about, ways in which you might not recognize the importance of it if you're one of those people that's kind of like, yeah, like I'm good kind of a thing. So we're doing all this with the goal of empowering you to flourish in your own life and to know what that might look like for you, because it's going to be different for everyone. This is the first episode in this format, so we are very excited to be bringing you this in what we are intending to be a nice cohesive flow.
Yes.
But if you have listened to mine and Steven's conversations before, you know that we might go a little off the rails, but I promise it's all it's all in good, nature and good fun, and it will be entertaining. And so this is also super cool because Stephen was the first guest ever on Shit I Wish Someone Told Me. And so it is super exciting that you were here, and thank you for being here with this new format. So I'm super excited. I've said it like 20,000 times, but it is what it is. So let me introduce you to Stephen. So Stephen Westbrook III has a bunch of certifications. So bear with me, y'all. So he is a certified strength and conditioning specialist, a clinical exercise physiologist, a 500-hour Yoga Alliance instructor. He also, but wait, there's more, has degrees in cellular and molecular neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and his master's in biochemistry. And whenever Stephen talks, you need to listen. And I don't usually say like you need to do this kind of a thing, but the man gets paid to speak and share his knowledge. And so it is a real gift that we have him here and that he's my friend. So he's doing this for me so that we can have this conversation today.
For free.
For free, right? For free. So he is also working with creating a nonprofit that I want you to talk a little bit about. And since I've been talking for this whole time, why don't you share anything that I failed to mention? And yeah, tell us a little bit about the nonprofit that you're starting, and then we'll dive into our conversation today.
Um, hey everybody, it is so good to be back on here. It's been so long since we've connected and we've had a conversation.
October.
Yeah, John and I actually haven't sat down with each other and talked in a while. So, we gabbed for like 2 hours prior to this, on top of the conversation we had on Wednesday for like 2 hours. Um, but yeah, so I decided to start a nonprofit organization. I teach pretty much every format there is known in the fitness industry. But the one that has been my saving grace, my silver lining, the thing that has cultivated me into a better wellness practitioner is yoga. And I know it's cliche because it's like yoga is very woo woo, but I grew up Christian, and my parents are pastors. I went to Bible college. Like I grew up with the expectation of becoming a pastor, and the pulpit was going to be the platform for which I communicated the word of God and my faith, and just challenged people to be better. And then I came out, and that just kind of like threw a monkey wrench in that. And I never thought I would return to ministry until I got into yoga. Like I had an amazing yoga teacher, and she said that there's no difference between yoga and your yoga practice and your faith practice. They are one and the same. And so I decided to start a wellness initiative called the Yoga Fellowship. It's a nonprofit organization that focuses on mental health wellness through movement. And the movement platform that we utilize is yoga. It has a lot of benefits for increasing your BDNF, dopaminergic centers, oxytocin in the body. So not only is it benefiting your neurochemical experience, but it's also working on your mind body connection, increasing proprioception, increasing your awareness of your experience. And ultimately, because the body keeps a score, we store trauma in our lived experience in our body. Exercise, which we like to move away from the fitness terms and more into the wellness terms, movement, spiritually based mindful movement, helps with relieving anxiety, stress, and ultimately dealing with the trauma that we hold in our body because our brain stores memory throughout it. So, yeah, that's pretty much what the yoga fellowship is. We specifically work with low income communities. We are functionally focused on the Black and Brown community. All people are welcome, but because there are a lack of resources in those spaces, we specifically do focus on the wellness in those spaces. So that's the yoga fellowship.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And I'll be sure to link everything in the descriptions here so you can find more information and check out more about the program and the yoga fellowship. And thank you for doing that. And yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we dive in today?
No, I'm just really excited about this conversation. I'm excited to see you.
Same, even though we've been talking for 2 hours, like literally two
I know,
hours.
but it's always so fresh and
This is true.
fun and
We're like
yeah.
focused. We're focused fresh. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, sir, without further ado, first question of the new format. What is some shit you wish someone would have told you about flourishing?
So first and foremost, I live in the city, so if you hear background noise, it's because I live in the city. Okay. They love to ride their dirt bikes in the street. So if you hear the background noise, that's what it is. You can look it up. It's a Philly thing. Um, but um, something that I wish someone would have told me about flourishing was that it is an experience that you have to go through, that you have to experience adversity in order to flourish. And there is a spectrum that you experience flourishing. Usually it's fortitude and resilience. That are key tenets of flourishing, and you usually don't recognize that you're flourishing until after it's occurred. So I think it's a post perspective experience that you have. Like you don't realize that you flourished until after the fact. So it's like you never see a tree really growing until it starts to bear fruit. You plant it, you grow it, you water it, but then you're like, ah, this tree isn't growing, and then you look up and it's like 100 feet tall, and it casts this large shadow, and then
Right.
you're like, damn, like, oh, you flourished, and it happened over time, but you never really saw it. Like you don't see it growing deeper roots. You don't see the rings of the tree as it gets wider until after the fact. And so I think just having someone tell me that it is a scalar experience, that it happens over time, and that you should be really cognizant of it, listening to internal cues, and taking time to look at the markers of your experience, like appreciating day to day growth. Because I think sometimes we only look at the big experiences, like
Yes.
when we graduate college, when we get a promotion, when we buy our first house or we buy our first car, but we don't look at all the things that built up to that. You got your credit good, you saved your money, you were disciplined, and even more so than the accomplishment, the journey to flourishing is the most important aspect of it.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the fact that it's like a process, right? Because so a conversation that we had recently, the episode before this, is about self-reflection and exactly what you spoke to. It's one of those things too where if you don't have, a metric on it, if you're not really consciously taking time to, do that recall, if you will, and check out like, what worked this week, what worked, this past month kind of a thing, then sure, like you can experience success, but the way in which you're going to do it might not be, you know, you might not feel as in control or you might not realize it like you said until like after the fact. But whenever you take the time to kind of get little pulse checks along the way, then you're able to effectively or essentially more effectively navigate what it is that you are trying to do or whatever's coming your way to get the outcome that you want. And one of the things that you had asked whenever we were preparing for this conversation is, is it possible to flourish without experiencing adversity? And so my response to that was, I'm laughing because that cup is huge. My response to that is, at first I was like, well, maybe, right? Like if someone is able to go through these things and know how to navigate them, like maybe they can flourish without having to go through the, adversity. But at the same time, it's something where it's kind of like, that would be like, studying the stuff, but not actually like putting it into practice. So that would be like, taking the classes to be a doctor, but not actually performing surgery kind of a thing. You essentially have to go through the actual experience in order to get the full results and actually arrive at this place of flourishing, because otherwise it's not the same. And I think that, to what you said, it's something that you don't realize until after the fact, like, wow, I've come a long way kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so yeah, I love that you brought that point up. And also I just wanted to add in the fact that whenever you do take time to self-reflect, you can, get like a better grasp on that, and start to, yeah, like see what's working towards your flourishing, see what your effective like coping strategies are and that kind of thing, so that you can set yourself up more powerfully. Do you have anything you wanted to add there before we go into the next part, or?
No.
Okay, cool. So as you know, Stephen has lots of degrees, and so we are going to get an inside look at some of the science behind what actually happens and what it looks like and like what it means to actually flourish on a scientific level. So let's speak some science to us. And if there's anything that I'm like, no one's gonna know what that, if I don't know what that means, I'm gonna like, hey, so you can like lay people terms it.
Right.
Okay, cool.
So, flourish is a positive psychology term that has been around for a while. There are two schools of positive psychology, eudaimonics and hedonia. And the idea around flourishing is what is being produced um, in your experience, right? So, all right, I'm so sorry about the noise, but the idea is what's the end goal, right? If we think about looking future forward and the production, um, what's been produced, right? If you were to start a farm, you plant a bunch of seed, and the goal is to produce fruit, right? And it's like, okay, the time that it takes to get to the actual production of the fruit, the work that you invest, the time, the relationship, all of these things create the environment, and the environment dictates what you get out of the fruit. Not only can you can produce fruit, but the fruit could be bad, right? Or and so you tasted a piece of fruit and you were like, you went to the store, you were like, I have a taste for apples, and then you get the apples and you're like, these apples are nasty as shit.
Yeah.
And then you go into the store and you're like, okay, I'm gonna try it again, and then the next batch of apples that you got, you're like, oh my god, these taste so good. The difference between the two batches of apples are the tenets of functional positive psychology and flourishing. So there's this thing that was coined by Dr. Seligman, who was essentially the president of the APA, the American Psychological Association. When he came into his tenureship, his focus was for positive psychology was the idea of flourishing. And so he coined this term called PERMA. So it's positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And so these are the scalar tenets by which flourishing is measured, right? So if you were to ask yourself, if we were to think of flourishing from a scientific perspective, it needs to be testable, and then it needs to be repeatable.
Right.
So essentially, if you want to question and ask yourself, am I flourishing? One of the things you can check is, do I have positive emotions, right? A positive affect is going to produce positive relationships. So then you're going to talk about engagement. Am I experiencing a positive interaction with the people that I'm around and with the environment that I'm involved with? So then engagement leads into relationships. So how do your relationships look? Are they healthy? Are they empathetic? Are they encouraging and edifying? Or are they draining? Do you feel tired when you have these interactions with individuals? And all of that has not only a psychological effect, but it has a neurochemical effect on your experience that can lead to long-term mental illness. Um, and so the focus is making sure we have positive affect, then having healthy engagement, having edifiable relationships, so emotional and relational equity. Meaning, the meaning would be okay, why am I here? What is the purpose for my experience? More than just making money and having sex and just leaning into the hedonics of our experience, just the pleasure, but the eudaimonic experience of okay, what is my purpose? And then lastly, it would be accomplishment. So what if I have the meaning, right? The meaning of my life, and then I set the goal. The goal is the accomplishment, right? What is it that I'm trying to attain?
Right.
What is the prudence of my life, right? What am I trying to lead? What legacy am I trying to lead? Like one of the things that I focus on is has always been having a positive reputation and having good character, because your name is the only thing that's really left with you. And so my goal is always to treat people with respect, treat them kindly, be empathetic. And so in every space that I've been in, people could say two things. Steven is either a bitch or he is the kindest person that you will ever meet. And so for me, usually I'm a bitch when you've already like crossed the line, right? If you start off crossing the line, you're just gonna get the clause, right? But 10 times out of 10, you're going to get the empathetic, caring person, because at the core of who I am, I care about people. I love people. I want to see them do well. I want to see them thrive. And so, as a professional, my goal has always been connecting people to resources,
Mhm.
being the step stone to help people get to the next level, because my goal is never to get to fame, right? My goal is to help others achieve their best self, and I'm okay being in the background. And so that I know my meaning, I know what I add to people's lives, I know I have positive relational equity. And my accomplishment is based on the goals that I have. My goal is to help people get to the next level. And so all of these things roll into each other. If you think of like those old movies in the 50s and the 60s when they were like trying to hypnotize people, and they have the black and white bullseye, kind of like Johnna's background. They all revolve in each other, they all cycle each other, they all feed into one another. So positive emotions lean into your goals. Positive emotions lean into the relationships that you have with people. So when you're thinking about am I the science of flourishing, these five tenets help you to question, if your experience is in flourishment. Now you have flourishing on the far end of the spectrum, and then you have languishing, which is closer to the end of the spectrum, and then you have mental illness. And so in positive psychology, when we're working with clients, the goal is to see where you fall on the spectrum. Now the large majority of the population is not quite in languishing and not quite in flourishing. They're somewhere in the middle. And emotions and the emotional experience, the mental experience is circumstantial. So it's based on your experience, where you currently at in life. The goal for positive psychology and the idea of flourishing is to find your baseline, build fortitude and resilience, and to always be, no matter what the circumstance is to ground yourself based in those five tenets. Ground yourself in your relationships, ground yourself in your meaning, ground yourself in your goals, ground yourself in the positive relationships, your positive emotions, and your engagement. And those things keep you grounded in spite of whatever's going on in your world. Now, to get to a more functional understanding of PERMA and how it relates to your physical experience, your lived experience from a biological standpoint, um, having a positive emotion, a positive affect, helps to produce oxytocin, which is the love drug. Bdnf, which is brain-derived neurotropic factor, dopamine. It has positive effects on the dopaminergic centers of the brain, and serotonin. Now, all of these things are important for your lived experience because they actually make you function properly, right? So when these neurotransmitters, these neurochemicals are thrown out of whack, when they are thrown out of whack on the far end of the spectrum, they cause mental illness. But when they are functionally active and they're healthy, they produce a state of flourishing. Now, one of the things that John and I had talked about was BDNF, brain derived neurotropic factor. It has many positive benefits, such as it helps with your hippocampus, which is the memory center of the body. Now, the body cannot hold all of the memory that it experienced, right? We're here on this earth for 50 to 70 years. So the body has a way of storing energy and information. Well, some people listen, that's it's somewhere between 50 and 70.
50 to 70, I made a face. So shit. I mean, I'm about done then.
Nah, you probably live to like 90. You can't die until I die, so it is what it is.
Well, my grandma did just turn 101, so
Well,
you got away, sir. You got
listen,
away.
listen, my rule of thumb is when I can no longer take care of myself, just take me home to Jesus. That's it. I want to be done. Yep, I want to be done. I have this theory that I had all my partners have always been like, you're exaggerating. If I become paralyzed, that's it. Let me go. Because I can't do for myself. I'm just very independent in that way. But that's a conversation for something else.
That's another
So,
shit I wish. Yeah,
um,
so go ahead.
so we were talking about BDNF. So BDNF is directly linked to cell growth. Okay, that is the one part of the brain that is constantly in a state of neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is when there's new cell growth, right? So the brain is the brain. It is what it is. If there's brain damage, there's no way to regrow that damaged brain tissue. But because the body is resilient, the mind is resilient, you can regrow neural pathways, but the actual tissue is necrotic, it dies, you can't do anything about it. But the hippocampus is awesome because it is where stem cells still grow, right? Stem cells are usually in spinal fluid or in bone marrow, but hippocampus is where that's where they are constantly growing. And the question has always been, why can't we just get stem cells from living humans? Well, it's unethical to like take a living human and extract, stem cells from the hippocampus. Um, but one of the things that I think is really cool about the hippocampus is because not only does it regulate memory, it also regulates our higher functional learning. It's where adaptation occurs. So exercise is one of the things that exacerbates or increases BDNF in the brain. So it helps the hippocampus grow, but it also helps the hippocampus learn to adapt. It teaches your brain to adapt. Right now, the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, they are tied together. And one of the things that I'm actually learning as a nutrition coach, how fasting has benefits to the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. Now, when you fast, especially after 12 hours, what happens is this thing called autophagy is when the brain starts to like it's like cellular breakdown essentially. Now when the body goes into fasting mode, the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, they don't go into autophagy, they actually go into like hyperactive mode, and so it kicks in the higher functionality of survival. So your nutrition and the way that you eat has a benefit to your overall functionality. So it's important to think of flourishing from a holistic perspective. It's not just perma, right? The positive emotions, the relationships. It's also the relationship that we have with ourselves, the food that we eat, the exercise that we do, our sleeping habit that goes into serotonin. Serotonin modulates our sleep cycle. So all of these things it's ultimately built on healthy relationships, right? Cultivating an environment that allows you to flourish. Think of a plant. You put it in good soil, you water it, you put it in sunlight. You also go out and if you're a bougie plant daddy like me, you go and buy neem oil because you want to kill the little critters that may cause infections to your plants. So my goal as a plant daddy is to be creating an environment so that this plant flourishes, right? Not only am I giving it, I'm creating the physical environment for growth, but I'm also creating a relationship, an emotional tie to this living organism so that it cultivates a state of flourishing. So it's not just the physical experience that is flourishing, it's the unseen things, right? You can't see a relationship with someone, but you can feel it, right? And healthy relationships cause an increase in oxytocin, the positive love drug, right? So oxytocin is most notably um, it most notably occurs during. I literally hate the city. It most notably occurs during intimacy, childbirth, and child rearing, or when you're feeding a child. And so for women, oxytocin it allows for the body to dilate, so you can push a baby out. When it comes to nursing, it allows for lactation. But during intimacy, it allows all the feel good pleasure centers to activate. They go into hyperdrive. And so when you have sex with a person, you built a healthy, positive relation with them. So there's positive affect, there's engagement, there is accomplishment, right? Because you like, yeah, I scored, right? And then there is meaning. So all of these things you are creating perma with this other person, it exacerbates this neurochemical experience that you have, which is why sometimes it's so hard to break relationships, right? Sex makes things so much harder to leave. So when you think about the relationships that you build, is my relationship with my partner flourishing? Or is it just chemicals?
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different conversation
That's a
for
whole different
another
conversation.
time, right? You have to question: is it science or is it something deeper? Am I really aligned with this individual? Because if you're aligned with a person in relationship, you guys are going in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you may not always go at the same speed, but you are going in the same direction. And there is alignment that occurs in healthy relationships. Your meanings are aligned, your accomplishments are aligned.
Right.
There is relational equity, there's positive affect, and there is engagement.
Yeah.
So, not only from the perspective can perma be applied to yourself, you can apply it to the relationships that you're in, whether it's your work relationships, whether it's your personal relationships, or it's your spiritual relationships. You know, do I have perma with God, right? And it's all at its root, flourishment is based on relationship.
Yeah.
Wellness is based on relationship, and the idea is all about relationships. It's all about communication. It's all about an exchange. And a healthy exchange is going to have a positive affect on your physical experience.
Yeah. Woo! I'm like, there's so much to say in response to that. You did an awesome job about like keeping it like understandable terms. So kudos, sir, for that. Because oftentimes Steven says things and I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was totally understandable. Thank you for that. Like so I mean, where do we even begin to like unpack that? I think so. I want to address, because I feel like this is probably sticking out for like everyone, but people who are like, oh, they're just a fuck buddy, like we don't have any like relation, like I'm not connected. Like there's science, like things happen within the chemistry of your body that yeah, like creates like these things to make you like want to bond with that person. And so regardless, like if you were trying to say like they're just a fuck buddy, you are lying to yourself. Like things happen. Like it's not like, oh, you're weak, or oh, like you're just emotional or sensitive. It's like the chemicals are there for a reason. And so that's what I want to point out, number one. Number two, I want to talk about what you essentially said. Like Cliff Notes version is just that flourishing is related to relationships. And that's something that I speak about a lot whenever it comes to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Once we have like our need for like self shelter and safety met, then like once those are good, then the next thing that we need in order to, you know, eventually be able to experience self-esteem and self-actualization is love and belonging, is that connection to people, it is that community. And I think and I love what you spoke about, like giving people, perma and the definition of what that looks like, because I think so many times we find people that we just latch on to
Yeah.
because we don't want to be alone. And
Right.
so I think that, you know, you asked me this on our conversation, and this is a great, segue to our next topic, which is what are some ways that flourishing shows up in people's lives, and like what does it actually look like to flourish? And the question that you asked was like, would I consider myself as flourishing? And I was like, in some ways, absolutely, in other ways, not at all.
Right.
And in the ways in which, I feel matter to me, I'm like, pretty much, right? There are some areas that I want to do, like I would like to make some changes in. I would always like, I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means, but I'm saying like I feel, comfortable. And there's like a fine line too between like, are you just kind of coasting or are you actually like thriving and flourishing? Um, but whenever it comes to the ways that this shows up, I think that oftentimes a lot of us just find ourselves in this complacency so that we don't have to go out and like be alone, or so that we don't have that fear, right? Because everything essentially relates back to some fear to keep us safe, because
Yeah.
we do more to avoid harm than we do to actually experience pleasure, whatever that may look like. And so I think that so often we find ourselves in this situation where we might be like, well, like I have people in my life, so does that mean that I'm flourishing? Not if those aren't your people, right? Like, not if those aren't, relationships that, like you said, are edifying and, you know, are actually ones that support you in feeling comfortable in who you are and being able to express yourself as such, and that, support you in that way. And so, um, yeah, I think that that's a great segue, yeah, to that point. So, what are some ways that flourishing shows up in people's lives?
So I just want to. I love that you talked about your experience, because like you were talking about reflection recently. It's important to look at your experience as you navigate life, from a day to day basis, from a week to week basis, from a month basis. That's why journaling is so important, because it allows you to see your growth patterns, but it also allows you to see your regression patterns, because it
Right.
happens. But one of the things that I think people don't understand, when it comes to flourishing, is that it's not easy.
Mm,
That work is required, discipline is required. So if you think about, like, you inherit a farm, right? And you know that you have to produce a crop. It's work that has to be done. You have to till the ground. You have to remove the rocks. You have to water the soil. You have to put up scarecrows to keep the other animals from tearing up your crop. There's
well,
so
shit,
many.
I'm gonna call Steven. I'm about to call Steven when I heard. I didn't know all that. I was like, I don't know you.
I'm a burgeoning plant daddy, so I'm like into plants.
Let's
Um,
see.
well, because I'm not having sex, so I need to pour my oxytocin into something else that I love, right? Other than my nieces. So like healthy relationships, they need to be cultivated. I love my nieces, right? They are reflections of my growth, reflections of me flourishing, because how I behave now is indicative of them being in my life and the meaning that I have to their life, right? But at the root of that is what? Relationship. And so me cultivating myself into a more mature individual was not easy. It required work. And so as we think about flourishing, we have to think about a spectrum, right? And it's not so much we talked about this the other day, um, doing what is best for you, right? So there's a right thing and there's a wrong thing, and the identity of the right and the wrong is probably the most difficult aspect of flourishing, because it causes you to look inside yourself and to understand your identity, right? And our identity is constantly changing, it's constantly in a state of flux, because we have these external stimuli that are influencing us, right?
Mhm.
We talked about how society has a tendency to um, exert its influence on us, how we see ourselves, how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to live our lives. Most recently, what happened today, SCOTUS reverse Roe versus Wade. So it's a direct attack on privacy and body autonomy. So you have these external stimuli that are going to cause you to reflect and question your identity. What is best for me? What is right for me? That is the start of flourishing. Having the insight to be discerning about your experience is the beginning of flourishing, because you're asking the right questions to get to your next level, right? You have to say, okay, acknowledge where I'm currently at and then where I want to be.
Yeah.
That is the engagement with self, developing a relationship with self, and then you have the development of your meaning, right? And then you have accomplishment where you set goals. Right now, we set goals all the time, but actually accomplishing them is really challenging. So, between finding our meaning and setting our goals and then accomplishing our goals, there is something that is lacking: the work, the discipline. And so when you think about, okay, am I flourishing? We talked about this the other day. My issue is I have a failure to finish. Now, if it's school stuff, I'll do it, right? If it's free shit, I ain't gonna do it because it doesn't hold any value. But when it's things that I have, when there's a monetary value associated with something that I'm doing, I'm going to commit to it, right? And if we as individuals looked at our flourishing as from a debt analysis perspective, right? The less that I flourish, the more in debt I am.
Mhm.
We would be more inclined to work on flourishing, developing a deeper sense of self, connection to our environment, putting ourselves in a healthy environment that is going to produce positive, healthy behavior. Because the only reason we go to work is because we want to buy shit and because we're in debt, right? Otherwise, we would not work. And that directly aligns with the idea of flourishing. If you want to accomplish a state of flourishing, you have to work for it. So, one of the things that Johnna and I had discussed as we were thinking about, like, okay, this is an introduction to the idea of flourishing and how we could build this out. I built it from a wellness perspective, a physical perspective. So, um, I told you about PERMA, right? And you have these are the tenets, the scalar tenets that you would question yourself about to see if you're flourishing. But it's not just psychologically and emotionally that we apply PERMA to. We can apply it to our physical experience. So, like I was talking to you about BDNF and oxytocin and dopamine, all of these chemical experiences are tied to the external stimuli that we encounter in our environment. So we talked about this the other day. Healthy relationships increase the dopaminergic centers.
Mhm.
When we have a healthy relationship and we have positive reinforcement and engagement in those relationships, it activates the pleasure centers of our brain. It activates the reward centers of the brain. More dopamine in your system means that your body can respond more effectively because it's in a state of relaxation, right?
Right.
When you are in a stress state, you deprive your body of oxygen. There's an increase of cortisol. So the body is responding out of fight or flight rather than a state of relaxation. So your higher functioning, you're not going to be able to see everything. You're going to get tunnel vision, right? And you're going to make rash decisions rather than if you had a more relaxed experience, you can see things in your periphery, you can make a better decision. And so often when we think about flourishing, we rush our experience to growth.
Yeah.
Take your time.
Yeah. I want to just like take something that you just shared about how whenever we feel safe, essentially, right? Whenever we're flourishing, whenever we have these positive chemicals and we're experiencing these positive feelings and these emotions, then we're in a space where we feel like, taking our time, like relaxing, like looking at the options, right? Like seeing the bigger picture kind of a thing, instead of feeling this like urgency and this pressure to make a decision. And, that's where a lot of stress and anxiety comes from, right? Because if we make a decision, we haven't really thought about it, that decision turns out to not be the best for us. And then therefore we start to, lose trust within our ability to make decisions. So lack of inner trust, and it just kind of, it starts to spiral and shit. So
Yeah.
when we are in this state of flourishing, where we're in this relaxed state, where we have these, feel good chemicals and these positive emotions, that's something from positive psychology that is known as the broaden and build theory. And that's something from the research of Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, where she speaks to, exactly what you said. When you are in this space, you broaden your horizons, and
Mhm.
what that does is open you up for more experiences and opportunities to build on your social connections. And so it's really something where, you know, this notion of flourishing has the impacts to, like you said, comes from relation, and has the impacts to help increase like your self-esteem, increase your self-confidence, and really just, help you to live like like basically your hashtag best life, like for lack of a better like
Yeah,
phrase.
that's exactly what it is. Like I think so often we get caught up in we forget that we're here to grow,
Hmm.
right? And I think we're so busy getting caught up in what can I get out of life rather than what can I give life, right? What how the goal is to produce good fruit, right? At the end of the day. Um if we thought about it from an economical experience, right? Output, we're put here for output. What is your output? What is your production value? And that's for people that think from a very mechanical perspective. Um, if you rush the fruit tree to production, it's going to first of all they're not going to be ripe, right? They're going to be underproduced. They're gonna have the flaws, issues. Like it's gonna be fucked up. It's gonna be a hot fucking mess, right? So the idea is that if we're thinking about production value, whenever we rush things, right? Like you were saying, a rush to judgment, we fuck it up, right? And if we started to take more time and then put ourselves in environments that cultivated patience, and consideration, empathy, those positive that the big putting yourself in a positive affect and in an environment that produces emotions of positive affect, it helps to increase your self-awareness. It increases a healthy neurochemical experience, and then it also cultivates a higher production value from you. Like the goal is always to be getting something good from yourself. That is what flourishing is. If you think about flourish comes from the Latin word flower, right? Flowers take time to bloom, right? They never just rush. And then flowers bloom seasonally. They don't bloom all throughout the year. And sometimes they bloom whenever the fuck they want, right? We're so busy trying to produce something and trying to bloom ourselves into an experience or to an aesthetic that in the end we rushed ourselves and we fucked it up, right? So you know me, I like to I say what I want. Um, a lot of time I have an issue with plastic surgery, right? Because I understand that some people need it. Like women, when your bodies get trashed by your babies and you want to get a nip and tuck, that is fine. Because little humans wreck your body. Okay, so that's fine. Like for cosmetic purposes, and it's gonna be for the enhancement of your psyche and your experience. I'm all for it. But if you're doing it because it's like, all right, well, I want to be a social media personality, right? Because a lot of people do it. How many times have we heard stories, people rushing their bodies, rushing to get a certain experience, and then they look back and they're like, fuck, why did I do this? Rather than taking the time to research and talk to people and understand their journey, give themselves time to grow into their bodies. I've had clients who have gotten plastic surgery very young, and they didn't give their bodies time to actually flourish into what they are naturally, and then their bodies are fucked, right? And you constantly have to be doing this maintenance, right? You're constantly spending more money, and you're constantly getting cut. And people forget your skin is an organ, right? And every time it gets cut, it takes life off of your experience. It takes time to recover, and it actually takes time away from your lifespan. And so, if we started to think of how we flourish from the perspective of plastic surgery, we've all watched Botched. People rushing to get a look that is not even their own, rushing for an aesthetic that's not their own, and then it gets fucked up and they can't fix it, and you are flawed for life. Take your time. Take your time. Put yourself in a positive affect, in a positive environment that is going to allow you to grow at your own pace.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch on whenever you were speaking in regards to relational equity is, we all meet those people throughout our lives that are like, they just make me want to be a better person.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that what we're speaking to in this conversation is really sort of explaining the science behind that. Like, it makes sense whenever you see these people that you not only feel inspired by what they're doing, but also within yourself to take action to be more like them, because things are happening on like a chemical and like a hormonal, like a biological level, but also, yeah, like you're feeling that in your emotion and in your body, and so there's a connection there. And so it's something where, to take it back to like what we've been speaking about, like the relation is something that is really important when it comes to flourishing. And it's something where I think so many of us, look for the situations where we can be like lifted up. I think that it's oftentimes really hard for people whenever they do go through some experiences that are not so favorable in life, or some traumatic experiences, and they find themselves in a position where they need that community, right? But it's oftentimes something where we are fearful of asking for that help because we don't want to be perceived as weak, or we don't want to be perceived as unable to quote unquote like handle our own shit, let's say, because our society has sort of primed us to be
Uh,
these independent, like
yeah.
self-sufficient kind of entities. And on a biological level, like that's just not who humans are. And something that you also mentioned about surrounding yourself with people whose like values you align with, and with people who are going to give you the space and the patience to make your own decisions. I think something that I wanted to touch on with regards to that as well is the notion of trust. I think that we are so often surrounded by people who are like, well, you shouldn't have done that, or you should have done this,
Right.
which is them projecting their own experience onto you, and their own, guilt around not taking a different course of action when they had the opportunity to, instead of allowing that person to, make their own decisions. And so what happens then is we have all these people walking around who don't trust themselves,
Yep.
like what I touched on earlier. And it's a situation where, when you find, pay attention to who tells you what you quote unquote should and shouldn't do,
Right.
because I think that it's very telling when you find someone who will say to you, I just about got chills, because like I'm just thinking, like in my own personal life, I've really done a good job surrounding myself with people who are like, I can't make this decision for you, but I'm going to support you regardless of what you do decide. I'm happy to share my insights and what my experience has been, but they very much like sit back and, I don't want to say let you make your own mistakes, but they let you choose your path. They let you take the controls, and they empower you in that decision by letting you know that, like, hey, like I've got your back regardless. Even if I think like you shouldn't go back to your ex, like if that's what you feel you need to do right now, I'm going to tell you I don't think you should, based on my experience. But at the same time, if you do, I'm not going to put you in a position where I'm mad at you for making that choice, for
Right.
not taking like my advice. And I think that I just want to point that out, because I feel that's something that I really, really saw a lot thinking back to like my previous relationships, where it was that people would try to tell me what I should be doing. And it's
Right.
something that really pissed me off because I didn't like that. And I was never able to really articulate it and recognize it for why, right? Because it was making me lose like trust within myself. And I was really defiant with that. And so Yeah, surround yourself with people that allow you, like you said, like the patience and the time to choose what's best for you, and that then don't turn around and tell you, well, I told you so, or well, you should have done this instead, because yeah, that's going to, like, that's going to pick at your own inner trust, and that's not what you need.
That goes into the theory of relational equity, where relationships, healthy relationships, cultivate growth. Um, if like we were talking about the plant, when a plant is placed in good soil and in space where there is a healthy flow of sunlight, and there's uh, fresh water and there's care and there's energy, it cultivates that plant to grow to its fullest potential. Um, like a pothos. A pothos is like a vine plant. It will grow and grow and grow. It will grow all over the place as long as the conditions are right for growth. And that's how relationships are. We had talked about this the other day, about how um, healthy relationships that have meaning, that have um, positive affect, that are engaging, they are safe
Mhm,
and they activate the pleasure centers of the brain.
mhm.
And like you were saying, how when you get around people that just make you feel good, like you just seeing them excites you.
Right.
It is a neurochemical experience. It is a biophysiological experience that you are, that certain someone's presence activates in you. The way it works is you have this external stimuli that the input comes into your ocular nerve, travels to your vagus nerve, and then it cascades all these neurochemical responses in your body. So not only do you have the memory of this person, but on a molecular level, this person is having an effect on you.
Yeah.
And that's how our relationships should be. They should be positive and they should affect us on a molecular, because we are molecular creatures. We're built on molecules. And so at the root of who we are, we crave connection, healthy connection, right?
Mhm.
Babies, they come out of the womb. They aren't like standoffish and shady and like don't talk, don't touch me. They're like they want connection, they crave it, and so the ideal um, foundational experience is connection, healthy, positive connection. And I think that's one of the things that we get away from. And I think that as this is growing and we're talking this out, I wish someone would have told me that flourishing is rooted in relationship.
Mhm.
Like, in order for me to really flourish as an individual, I have to cultivate healthy relationships. A healthy relationship with myself, healthy relationship with others.
Yeah. Woof. That's some good shit.
Mm.
So, okay, we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk cost. What's the harm in not flourishing?
I'm glad that you asked that. So, what happens when we don't flourish? Um, Specifically, like, okay, let's take it from a very uh, digestible experience that other people can understand. What happens when you don't exercise?
I feel like shit.
Okay. But also from outside of just your emotions, what happens to your body?
Oh, it gets deconditioned.
You get deconditioned after a certain amount of time, your muscles,
Muscles atrophy.
and then there's an increase in body fat, and then your biophysiological uh, experiences start to break down, right? It gets harder to, like, when you finally get, you're like, all right, I'm gonna go work out. It's so much harder
Yeah.
because you lowered your baseline.
Yeah.
So essentially, that's what flourishing is. When we stop
Mhm.
flourishing, we lower our baseline. And like I said, there's flourishing and then there's mental illness. And as we start to slide out of flourishing, we get closer and closer and closer to languishing. And then
Mhm.
we get closer and closer and closer to mental illness. And the idea is that yes, people are sad, people are depressed, people are anxious. Um, those are normal experiences that you're going to have from a day to day basis. It is when you stay in those emotions, you stay in those spaces, that it turns to mental illness. You know, the DSM-5 or 6, wherever we at now, says that, you know, it's the consistency of the emotion, of the experience, that dictates the illness, right?
Right.
So it's when a habit is performed over and over and over that it becomes a state, and the state becomes the illness. And so
Right.
essentially, you can be in a state of flourishing, or you can be in a state of mental illness or languishing. So it is practice, right? It is consistency. When you don't practice flourishing on a molecular level, what happens is transient BDNF breaks down the body, right? When you don't actively exercise on a regular basis, or we don't even have to call it exercise, when you don't intentionally move
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis,
Mm-hmm.
it starts to cause a breakdown. And one of the funny things is that exercise increases BDNF, right? BDNF is control. It controls your adaptability, your higher functional thinking, your memory, acquisitional learning, right? When you stop exercising, we get dumber. We are always like, we're constantly can't remember, right? Our recall reduces. That's exactly what happens. A lack of production of BDNF causes the hippocampus to move slower. Your higher functioning moves slower because a reduction in BDNF causes recall to lapse and to decrease. It also has an aberrant effect on your eating habits. So studies have shown that lower BDNF in your body causes you to eat poorly. And so a correlation, when you don't exercise, you want to eat like shit, right? And it's so much
Sure.
harder to go exercise after eating like shit. So it's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Like when I think about I eat like when I get into my depressive moods, right? And I'm not in a state of flourishing. Because it
I know
happens.
what you eat. You eat Oreos.
I will eat, no, I eat Oreos when I'm happy. I eat
Oh,
Oreos when I'm flourishing.
we eat Oreos all the time.
I eat Oreos all the time, because it's something that I enjoy, and I have a healthy relationship with it now. Now, the things that I eat when I'm languishing and when I'm closer to mental illness, when I'm in a depressed state, when I'm struggling with my bipolar disorder, or when I'm struggling with my ADHD, I eat really badly. I go for foods that are high in carbohydrates, foods that are highly processed, foods that are high in fat,
Mm.
right? So, like, I like to eat French fries and cheesesteaks and like stuff that's just like very Philly, right? Things that are just heavy and fat. Like, just give me a hot cup of oil and like I'm happy, right? So, me not being in a state of flourishing dumbs my brain down. My
Mm.
dumb brain causes me to eat really poorly. That lowers my baseline physically. So then my muscles lose tonality. My reaction time decreases. My body is literally dying, right? When I'm not in a state of flourishing.
Yeah.
So that is the cost when you're not flourishing. You are dying faster.
I think in having this conversation, some shit that I wish someone had told me that I wanted to touch on is, so first of all, you have mentioned a couple times baseline. And so I just want to touch on that for a minute. We are all born with a certain like happiness set point, right? For the purposes of our flourishing conversation. And studies have suggested that you can actually raise that set point. And so it's not that, I don't want you to be hearing this conversation like, but, and we'll get to how you actually start to flourish here in just a second. But um, I want you to know that it's something that is possible, right? Like the whole, you can't teach an old dog new tricks has been disproven. You can't actually build and create new neural pathways. And so just want to put that there for anyone that doesn't know it. Also, some other shit that I wish someone would have told me is that you have to approach these positive emotions and these states of flourishing, like you said, like you have to continually like keep doing it, like you have to continually exercise. You have to kind of think of them as vitamins. Like I think oftentimes we're like, just say some affirmations, like, whenever we don't feel good, or just do some self-care whenever you're starting to feel burned out. The notion is that you are doing these things more as a preventative on a daily basis, like
Yeah.
you take your vitamins, so that we don't get to that point, so that we don't get to the point where you do burn out, or where you do have to, yeah, kind of do this like backtracking work where it's
Yeah.
something that you're like, oh yeah, well, I started to feel bad. And so like, let me say these affirmations now. It's something where whatever your process may be, whether it's, fitness, movement, whether it's affirmations, whether it's, journaling, meditation, we'll talk about some more things. And if you ever listen to us, we probably talked about them on that episode as well. Or if you've just heard us, talk for 5 minutes. But these are all things that you can do. And it's something where oftentimes, and this is something that was shared whenever we spoke about self-reflecting in the previous episode, that, when do you actually do it? And the majority, this you might find the statistic interesting. It was either on a consistent basis, like daily-ish, right? So the people that are taking their vitamins every day, who have learned that this type of flourishing work, that this thing requires work, like you said, and is valuable and worth doing it, or the equal majority was, I believe it was 38%, 38%. The equal majority was that they do it after something bad has happened, right? So whenever, like I was just saying, so it's like, oh, some shit's hit the fan. Now it's time for me to try to backtrack and see what went wrong so that I don't make that mistake again, right? Because we do things to avoid the discomfort, to avoid the pain, to keep us away from the fear more than we'll actually do something like taking the vitamins every day in order to seek that pleasure, in order to flourish, in order to seek that, positive effect that we've been speaking to this whole time. So yeah, I want to talk about that because we're talking about costs and we're about to talk about benefits, which
Yeah.
you spoke to some, but if you would just in a direct way, let us know what are some benefits of flourishing, like we've kind of alluded to, but just to kind of like, put them out there for everyone.
Well, just one thing, back to baselines.
Mm,
Baselines are not a bad thing. Um, Baselines keep us safe, right? But the goal is to constantly be moving the needle of our baseline, right? So if our baseline is 50%, the goal is to move the needle to 70%, right? And to be moving it to 90% and to move it to 100%. Now, as you navigate your lived experience, your baseline is going to move. The needle is going to move based on the experience. As you mature and evolve, you get to new levels, your baseline is going to shift, it's going to change. Um, the goal of flourishing is to be above your baseline, right? Um, the baseline is to catch you, right? And that's what it is. Resting at your baseline is not the goal. The goal is to be doing the work to stay in a state of flourishing, but understand that you have a safety net, which is your baseline. Okay. And the goal is to identify your baselines. Know that, okay, this is the where I can go before I am in and what is considered mental illness, right? Or what I am in and I'm considered like devastation. It's like when you're at the bank, right? And the bank notifies you when you hit your low cash mode, right? We set those standards for ourselves so that they hold us accountable and they keep us balanced, right? So treat your baseline as an accountability measure, right? Also as your safety tool, but it is that is it. It is a sounding board, and I think so often, especially in the coaching space and in the counseling space, we always are saying we want to get you back to baseline. Baseline is that's what it is. It's baseline, right? We don't I don't want to get my clients to baseline. I want to get my clients to flourishing. I want them to understand that the baseline is a safety net and it is your safe space, but the goal is not to be in the safe space. The goal is to be in that new thriving space, because in the thriving space is where we produce new fruit. We uh, we discover new parts of our identity. We become more creative. We become more enthusiastic. We love more. We become a deeper part of ourselves, right? And one of the things in yoga we talk about the chakras. We talk about anahata, which is the heart chakra. It is the deepest part of ourselves. It is also one of the most difficult chakras to activate because it's deep, deep within ourselves, and we have to spin all the other wheels in order to get to that space. But in order to get the heart space to flourish, we have to constantly be doing an active practice,
yeah,
working at it daily,
yeah,
not being at bit. You can't activate anahata if you're at baseline. You have to be in that flourishing state to activate anahata.
yeah. I love, so we're going like a little detour, but I feel this is important, like sidebar, main bar. Um, I love that you bring that up. The first thing that I do when I work with a client is establish their baseline, right? Like that's literally like session number one, baseline and possibility. Like we look at where you're at, how you got there, how we feel about that, and where we want to be. And, don't, I want to like put this out as kind of like a disclaimer, like knowing your baseline, it's not to judge, it's not to feel bad. Like once you realize like where your starting point is, right? Because that's essentially what the baseline is. And so it's like Stephen said, it's like your safety net. It's kind of like you're not always going to be thriving. And it's important to recognize that you're not always going to be flourishing. And sometimes, you are going to return to that baseline. And it's something that I think we oftentimes fear because it's like, I feel like I'm taking 2 steps back or 2 steps forward and like 3 steps back or something like that. But what you will recognize is, and what I find, and I want to hear about, what you think about this, but is once you start to do this work, once you start to step into this flourishing mentality and these, practices and this awareness, is that when you return to that baseline, it's something where you start to spend a little less time there every time. And it's
Yeah.
something where the coping mechanisms that you used to take part in aren't the same. And so that's how your baseline, I just got chills. That's how your baseline essentially starts to rise, is because you're going to keep returning, but also like that baseline is going to keep like moving a bit. And
Yeah.
so it's something where it's not something to fear. But like, Stephen said, you're not always going to be flourishing. It's just a flower doesn't always bloom, right? And so it's something where you're going to return, but you're also going to notice that when you return, it's going to look a little bit different, right?
But is it?
And
But is it if you return to it and it's different, is it really your baseline or is it a new level that you've reached? Right?
that's a good one. I think as humans, and this is just my personal, like off the cuff, like this is not a planned interaction. Um, I think it's one of those things where it's still your baseline, but you're looking at it through a new lens. I feel like it's kind of like you're going on a journey, right?
Yeah.
Like it's still home base. It's still like, where you came from, but at the same time, now you have this different perspective to look at it from. And so like, yes, it's the same, but like you're not.
Ooh, yes, friend. Okay. This is why I like having these conversations because like we work through the conundrums, right? And the goal is to help people get there. And I love the idea that your baseline, um, your baseline stays the same, but you change.
Yeah.
And the perspective, the lens that you look at your baseline changes. Like the goal is to be tipping the baseline and moving it higher
Right.
and getting to the
Right.
next level. It's like when you're playing a video game, right? You
Right.
go so far and then you reach that checkpoint and then it's like, oh shit, you go try and get to the next checkpoint, you die, and
Right.
you go back to the previous checkpoint. You've already seen that checkpoint, right? And you may return to it time and time and time again, but you learn
Yeah.
to avoid the pitfalls
Yeah.
within that stage so that you can get to the next one.
I love that analogy. Yeah. I just thought about like, I had flashbacks to the old school Nintendo. You had to like blow in the ends, remember?
Yes, I was thinking about Mario and
Yeah.
how you have to like sometimes
And
you'll
the
get to
pipes.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Oh, you're
And I
good.
think and that's I think that's the benefit of the flourishing. It's like it's the reflection. And I think that segues beautifully from the previous episode that flourishing is reflectionary. Like that's why I love yoga because no matter what you do, you can never perfect your yoga practice. Never. Like there's always a deeper engagement, whether you turn more inward into your mindfulness and your spiritual wellness, or you get deeper into your body, you connect deeper to your breath, you lengthen your muscles, you contract, you extend, you can like it's so much that goes there is never a perfection of your practice. You're
Yeah.
just building on top of what's already been built. And I think so like to get back on track, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for asking. How could you tell? So I wanted to say that I love, like you said, you've never perfected your yoga practice, and I feel that I love that you found that for you, because I think that like we never perfect anything, right? Like we're always able to go to like a deeper level, and your way of expressing that is through yoga. And so it's something where you're able to speak to that. And I want to invite and encourage anyone watching and listening to consider where they can apply that. It's never perfect in your own life, right? Like where's somewhere where that you can keep trying to like go a little deeper, like learn a little more, whether that be a skill or, with a relationship, or, with your own movement. Like for me, what came up is like Olympic lifting, which I'm not an Olympic lifter, but it's something that like, there's so many little things that you have to like drill, like you're never done. And so yeah, I just wanted to point that out, because I love that you keep going back to like yoga for that, because there's so many different facets of that. And I think just movement in general, which spoiler alert, we're gonna have a whole last another conversation on. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out, because and invite everyone to, consider in their own lives like where they can apply that same mindset, because I think it's just creme de la creme.
Yeah, I think one of the things that like we've had this conversation like I've only experienced suicidal ideation twice in my life. Once in high school, and then once I think at like 27, which everybody says like your Saturn is in return, and like you are like all the shit is shifting, everything is changing, and so for me, things changed like all at once. My condo collapsed. My
Mm.
partner like moved to another state and like did some foul shit, and then I rebounded with another partner, and he did some foul shit, and I was just like, I'm over it. I was just like ready to go. And yoga, like I was no longer at my baseline. I was completely in mental illness. Like I was in a state of consistent depression. And someone who struggles with bipolar disorder or manic depression, like you'll have times of mania where you're really high, or times of depression where you're really low. There, it was months I was really low, and the only time I put on a good face was when I was teaching. But it was crazy, and so yoga was the thing that balanced me. Yoga got me to my baseline, and it taught me that my baseline could move. That and it also taught me that my baseline could regress. It could regress, it could progress, and it could be static. And sometimes having a static baseline is okay. Sometimes the state of your flourishing, it does not move, right? You don't see a tree grow. You you know it does,
Right.
you don't really notice it until after it's really large, because over time you walk past it and you don't look at it
Right.
until you see something different. You see the fruit that's produced. You see the fruit actually on the ground is when you notice that the fruit has actually been produced. And so yoga has been that for me, because it has taught me to be kinder to myself, to give myself grace, to treat myself with loving kindness, and all of these things are positive emotions, right? That cause a positive affect on me, that help me to build healthier relationships, that has cultivated a healthier engagement, that has changed my meaning and ultimately changed my goals and led to a deeper accomplishment for myself. So, when you put yourself in spaces, environments that cultivate uh, these experiences, these foundational tenets, those are the benefit is that you are alive, right? And that you begin to thrive. The byproduct is the thriving, right? Is the flourishing. But I think also the flourishing is just being alive day to day. For me, my flourishing is the day to day being alive. Um, but if we look at like just from like a quantitative perspective, uh, flourishing reduces your stress, reduces your inflammation levels. Um, it increases your actual fitness, right? Even if you don't work out, but you put yourself in a state of flourishing, healthy relationships, positive affect, defining your meaning, setting goals that are reachable and attainable. They have a direct effect on your fitness, because your fitness is, yes, very much based on your muscles, but what controls your muscles? Your brain and your hormones. So if my brain works well and my hormones work effectively, my body is going to respond quickly. So your
That was
fitness
a
is,
good snap too. It's a good snap.
Because that's where it's at. It's the fitness because like the idea that fitness is based on survival, right? So if my mind is clear and I can assess danger effectively, and then my body can quickly respond because the neurochemical there's no neurochemical imbalance and everything is ready to respond in the way that it's supposed to, I am considered fit, right? Um, it allows you to prioritize social connections, right? It allows you to pour into the relationships that are healthy versus the relationships that are unhealthy, and it allows you to actually see them, right? Because when we do the work to define the relationships, when we do the work to define the meaning of the relationship, right, we give the relationships credence. It allows us to choose between which relationships are healthy, the ones that we want to give energy to. Do we want to give energy to the friends that edify us, or do we want to give energy to the fuck boys and the fuck girls? Because sometimes it's hard, right? Because sex and intimacy ties us to the fuck boys and the fuck girls. Healthy relational equity ties us to our friends that pour into us. And trying to attain a state of flourishing allows you to choose more clear mindedly the healthy ones versus the unhealthy ones.
Yeah, I love that because, okay, so again, taking it back to that fear component, right? Like one of the other reasons that we cling to those people who reject us is because there's a primal need to experience community. And so whenever a fuck boy or a fuck girl is like doing their thing, then on some primal level, we feel rejected. And so we want to therefore affirm and validate ourselves if you're not secure with who you are, if you don't have this, if you don't know what you don't know, essentially, right? Like if you're not flourishing, if you don't know how good things can be, then exactly like Steven said, it can be a position where you might go to this other thing because you have all these, chemicals and things happening in your body. Plus, like, it's deeply ingrained in you, like to be accepted that we need love and belonging, but you're seeking it in ways that aren't always best, right? And so it's important that you have this awareness so that so that you can now take that knowledge and use it to have more discernment to choose differently so that you can learn to trust yourself more. And the circle is complete. Ooh.
That's crazy because the faith that we have, the it takes faith to build healthy relationships with people because we never know if people are going to be there for us and they're going
True.
um to give back what we get, and it comes in different ways because everybody is in different states. So the way that I love you today may be different from how you love me back tomorrow, and it takes relational equity and empathy to say it's okay if that person can't love me the way that I love them, but they still love me in their way based on their present circumstances. And ultimately, that helps me to be a better person. It helps me to discern, like you said. I love the word discern because it feels ethereal, right? If we think about from the perspective of metaphysics, discernment is wisdom, right? The way we choose and judge rightly, right? That's what discernment is. It is wisdom and judgment to choose rightly what is right for me, right? And a right way that does not impinge on you. And I think that is the thing that we want to cultivate. Like there's so much that goes into the experience of flourishing, but I think at the root of it is relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you said about that because something, and I think I might have shared this on our preliminary call, where, sometimes not speaking up is actually advocating for your own mental health and your own well-being, because it's something where when you know yourself, when you are confident in who that is, when you have like these healthy communities that you can go to, it's something where, it's kind of like we spoke in the beginning about these external factors like the societal expectations. It's something where when you know who you are and you're secure with that, then sometimes it's safer to just kind of go along with like what's happening. And that's not to say to like put up with some bullshit, like don't be your authentic self, but it's saying, sometimes for your best interest, it's required. It's just, the best choice for you to make at that time. And knowing that you're doing it and taking action as well to remove yourself from that type of situation in the future is part of what I feel is a component to this flourishing concept.
Awareness is a part of the flourishing. Like we talked about BDNF. So BDNF, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all of those have positive effects on the brain, which increase your awareness. Like we were talking about, like things that allow you healthy eating habits have a positive effect on the brain, right? So that is a relationship. So when we think about flourishing, and it's broken down into these five tenets, right? And one of the, I think the most important tenet after this having this discussion is relationship, because everything that how we navigate life is built on relationship. So if we look at the relationship with our nutrition, it has a direct effect on how we respond. It has a direct effect on our awareness. So even if you are in a bad situation, but you're aware that you're in a bad situation and you're strategizing how not to be there again and how to get out of it, that is a state of flourishing. Because it's some people that are in bad situations and they don't know it. It's some people that are in bad situations and they just don't fucking care.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you were talking about the benefits. I didn't mean to interrupt. Are there any other benefits that we haven't touched on of flourishing?
So allows you to prioritize your social connections and build deeper relational equity. It builds your confidence in your body and your lived experience. It makes you a whole person. Like honestly, I think the greatest thing about flourishing and relationships is that it cultivates you to be who you are supposed to be in the simplest, cleanest, truest way.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I think we talked it up like extensively. We've explained it. We've talked about what it looks like. So, what are some actual tangible steps that our listeners and viewers can take if they want to step more into this flourishing lifestyle that we're speaking about?
First and foremost, I think reflection is the most important thing. Reflect as much as possible. Start journaling. Like the first thing that you can do is you could do it on your phone. You could write it down. Um, you could do a video journal. Like start reflecting. Like being aware of your experience.
Yeah.
Get a firm understanding of like what you're going through.
I'm a
Um,
big fan of voice noting. So, yeah, like voice
John actually put
noting.
me on to voice notes, and it actually keeps you accountable when you got shit to do.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
so easy. You can do it while you're walking the dog, driving your car.
it's and then honestly, you can set reminder. You can set the voice note and then set it with a reminder on your phone. So like if you say, "Oh, I got to take the trash out," like and it's good because it reminds you to follow up with it. Like if you do a voice journal, when I do my voice journals, my phone reminds me to actually like at the end of the day to write it down. So it's amazing because it really helps me to reflect. And from there, having that reflection allows me to seek out help, right? Someone to hold me accountable. So not only is the journaling an accountability measure, but talking to someone about what you've reflected on, because sometimes you like reflection is like Johnna talked about this earlier. um, they drive me crazy with the bikes.
I'm like, what
um,
are they doing? Are they racing?
no, they just ride around the block, like
Oh,
it drives me crazy. um, Cause like when I'm recording meditations, like I'll be like really into it, and then you'll be like,
that's
and I'm like,
hilarious.
it like throws off my flow, and then it like fucks up the recording. It drives.
What a fun meditation where you're like, this fucking shit. That'd be an amazing
But
meditation.
that's life, right?
That is
You be in the
life.
middle of meditating, and then some loud, ignorant shit like disrupts you, and you're like, "Fuck!" But it's the key is to like zen back in and get back into the zone. But journaling and then having an accountability partner, talking to someone, utilizing resources that can help you understand. Because it's one thing to know, and Jonna talked about this at the beginning of the conversation. It's one thing to know, right? And then it's another thing to understand. You can only have understanding once you've experienced it, right? And then having so it's knowledge, the awareness of something, right? And then it's the discernment, right? and then you have an understanding. And sometimes you can't get a full understanding unless you've looked at it from someone else's perspective, or they've given you wisdom from their experience.
Right.
So being
Right.
able to have a resource to assist you helps you get to that flourishing state. I did not get to this of present awareness by myself. Long conversations with my mom, long conversations with Johnna, long conversations with my aunt Marlena, my grandmothers, my mentors, my pastors. Like, I have had a community that has helped me get to this flourishing state. And what I tell people, especially in my yoga classes, plant yourself in good soil,
I love that.
because it allows you to produce good fruit. And I
I love
think
that.
that's all I have to say. I think
Like
that's
drop the iPad, drop the
yeah.
mic. Yeah.
Boom.
I love that so much, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, I would say, if you're looking for tangible steps to help you flourish, that it's to think about where you're not, like where are you not flourishing? Like, what does flourishing mean to you? Because we've spoken a lot about, what it is, and at the end of the day, while there's some overlap, there's some things that you can, gather from us. Ultimately, it's up to you. It's up to you, the listener and the viewer, and you know what's important to you based on your values, to decide what flourishing looks like to you. And so before you can take any step in that direction, you need to know, like, what that direction is. Like, is it north, is it south, is it east, is it west, or any combination. And so first of all, yeah, knowing what flourishing looks like to you. And then, like we've spoken about, in terms of baseline, like, where are you currently at then? And something that I love is applying like a number, scale of 1 to 10, because that's something objective, right? Like, you might feel some way one way and some way the other way, or another way the next day. But a number is more kind of, solid in that sense. So you can, give yourself a number that's probably not going to change too much. If I'm like feeling a 5 today and I'm feeling a 6 tomorrow, like, there's a difference, but at the same time, my understanding of what a 5 means to me is probably going to stay pretty consistent. And so once you have that, then it's a matter of considering what changes you need to make, and what's going to move you closer, like what's going to move that needle. And like Stephen spoke, it's one thing to know about it, and it's another thing to actually take action on it. And I love what you mentioned as well about accountability, and that, like, enlisting some support, because that's been a theme throughout this entire conversation. And I think that that's something, I mean, research has proven, like, if you just tell your goal to someone, or your intention to someone, if we don't want to use the term goal, then like the likelihood of you actually following through is increased by like 80% or something, just by like calling Steven and being like, hey, I'm going to go for a run today. I would probably never call Steven and tell him I'm going to go for a run today, because I'm not a runner. But
I'm gonna hold you accountable to it. And I'm gonna push you. I'm gonna be like, oh, you going for a mile? You can do a mile and a half.
I'm like, please don't. I don't want to run. But I mean, I guess, I mean, if we had to, we definitely could. But yeah, um, but that increases the likelihood. And so those are some things that I would say, like, figure out what flourishing looks like to you, recognize, figure out what your baseline is, and then actually consider what steps you need based on where you are and where now know you want to be. What needs to happen in the middle to kind of get you there. And um, yeah, if you need support with that, if you're kind of like, and you brought this up too, like, you didn't get there by yourself, right? I think oftentimes, and we spoke about this, like, trust yourself, like, the right, choices to make. And at the same time, that's not to say, don't look to others. Like, that's why people, have mentors. That's why people get coaches. That's why people work with professionals, because people have knowledge that you don't. And so it's important that you know what you want, know what flourishing looks like to you, so that you can seek out the right people to help you get there. And so it's not just, taking any Joe Schmo on the street and being like, well, you'll do, but really making sure that you know what that person can provide. Like, like, what that support can look like, and what support you need. I might just need Steven to tell me, hey, go for a run, right? Some people might need Steven to go for a run with them, kind of a thing. So know yourself and know enough, like, to know what kind of support you need, to help you in this. And that might look different for different goals. It might look different for different times, but know yourself enough to know and expect that it's going to change. So those are some things that I have to say about tangible steps. Do you have anything to add to that in your response? Anything to say?
No, ma'am.
Okay, cool. Well, we have spoken for a lot. We've been here for about an hour and a half. And so um, thank you all for listening and watching. Thank you, sir, for being here. You said you didn't do free stuff, but look, you just did because you made that comment.
But I love you, so
I love you.
I'm always down to support.
So
And like I was one of the first, so
you were the first, not one of the first. You were the first official Should I Wish. Like, so yeah.
I
And I
remember
will
when
put that.
we brought it up, and it's growing, and it's changing, and
Oh,
it's big. I'm proud
yeah,
of you.
thank you. I appreciate I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you for being a part of it.
Yeah,
And you
you're
can search, do it.
you're flourishing.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom, full circle, baby. Yeah, if you want to check out more of mine and Steven's episode, we've done more than just the ones in October. We did a whole, we did several episodes on fear and like what that looks like, what happens in your body when you're actually experiencing fear. So there's some great conversations on that. If you enjoy the science element of this conversation, you will definitely enjoy the science element of those conversations as well. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much. Where can we find you and what do you have going on?
So I am based in Philly, and I'm going to be start in July. I'm going to start back up with my virtual fitness classes. So I'm going to be doing some stuff on IG once or twice a week, and then if you're looking for I'm not doing as much PT as I used to because I'm leaning more into yoga. So if you're looking to get into an intentional movement practice and you want to move away from fitness and fully into wellness, you can just shoot me a DM and we can get a consultation going and get you moving. The yoga fellowship is building and growing. Every Sunday we meet at the Police Touch Museum, and we just it is an opportunity for community and a space of vulnerability where you can just be yourself and be happy and free being yourself. And I feel like that is the that's the truest benefit of flourishing, being able to be yourself. And my goal has always been to create spaces where people are welcome and they feel like they can be themselves. Um, I will be doing some, I'm always doing something. I'm working with some schools, doing some contract work to get kids healthy and fit. And most of the work that I'm doing right now, though, is work with the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I am as of yesterday, I'm one of their lead facilitators in the Philadelphia area.
What?
Working with
Congratulations.
yeah, it's cool because the crazy thing was the president of one of the local associations haven't taken my yoga class, and I've been talking about my struggle with mental illness and my struggling with the different diagnoses that I had experienced, just trauma. And she was like, I've never heard anybody talk like how you talk so candidly about your experience. And so she was like, "Hey, would you want to come on board?" And so I was like, "I don't care, whatever." And then it turned into this whole thing. And so we are able to provide resources to low income families that are single parent households, black and brown families that are struggling with generational trauma and trying to navigate anxiety, trauma, stress, lack of resources, and just providing access to them, but then also fungible, real, tangible practices to enhance their lived experience to get them to a flourishing state. So yeah, it's some cool stuff that's going on. So I'm excited. As always, it's always something new. I stay busy.
Sir, you're flourishing.
I am. God is good, and but I am not here because I'm here because I work hard. But I'm here because I have a really great support system. Because I could not do what I do without the people who help me, that push me to the front. Like, and I'm the type of person, I like to be in the background, but like I have a great team that pushes me to flourish and to produce good fruit. So I'm a product of what I am telling you to do. So
Wonderful job. and happy. I didn't know, like, we were going to update your bio
Yeah. I
again.
just remembered, I'm always doing something, so it's like, and I'm teaching at a new yoga studio, so like it's a thousand things going on at once, but it works with my ADHD brain, so it keeps me.
We're writing your bio this weekend. So all we have to do is copy paste.
Yes, and I'm going to figure out a way to like soundproof my apartment so I don't have to hear the bike noises. It drives me crazy.
LOL. And like it gives it character. That's how they know who I'm talking to. Okay, cool. Well, I'm excited and a little I didn't know. I didn't know all this cool stuff. So that's congratulations. And thank you for sharing it with us. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Technically, kind of like publicly. And
No,
so by the time that this comes out, July will be the following week. So they'll be able to catch you doing your live classes online.
yes.
So we'll make sure to put all that information in the description. So cool. Like I just mentioned, this is the new format. So that means that this is going to be, you're listening to this on a Monday or following. And so make sure to do us a favor if you found this helpful, and please share it with someone that would also benefit from it, AKA possibly your accountability buddy, right? As you move into this flourishing work. And make sure to check out my stories on Wednesday of this week. So that's going to be June 29th. Stephen and I have come up with some questions related to the conversation that we had today. And so we want to hear how what we have shared is landing for you this week, what may have come up after you've had some time to think about it and, process it and apply it in your own life, so that we can learn about your experience. Because on Friday, we are going to be having what is now called the after party. So typically in previous sessions before this one, that was the actual live itself, where we would present this content live. But what we're going to be doing as of July 1st at noon Eastern is we're going to be going live for the after party. And so we're going to recap this episode. And so you don't necessarily have to have listened to it, but you have at this point. And then we're going to speak to your results and what you had to say about how this landed for you based on your poll results and anything that you have shared with us via DM or comment in the days leading up to Friday, July 1st. And then we're going to do some live coaching. So if you have any questions, comments about flourishing, then we can coach you live via the comments. Or if you're feeling frisky, you could even come on screen with us. And so that is going to all be happening this week. So please, please, please do let us know what you think about this new format. Slide in my DMs over at Hey Johnna Renée on Instagram. You can say hey to Stephen over on Instagram at Stephen Westbrook 3 I's. So Stephen Westbrook I. So like the third.
Yes.
If you're like, what did she say? Just go to the description. It'll be linked there. But otherwise, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And thank you for listening and watching. And we'll see you this week. I'm excited.
See you guys. And if you're interested in the in looking up this information for yourself, which I always advocate, we're going to list the articles and a couple of books that you can read on flourishing just to get the work started. And if you have questions, reach out to Johnna. She's an amazing coach. She's been doing this work for a long time, and she'd be a really great resource for you.
Thank you. Stephen's a great resource as well. He's busy though. Just kidding. Yeah, thank you for adding that. Yeah, we will be giving you information. And yeah, if you have any questions, our DMs are open. So please do use them. That is why we were here. So, all right, thank you so much. And we will see you soon.